So we are going to sort of delve into what exactly is nanoscience. Okay, so this is sort of the heart of what's going on. We're going to sort of understand the size, the scale, the general ins and outs, and then over the next few days, we're going to actually sort of dive deeper into individual topics. Okay, all right. So again, the next 4 days, we're going to talk about what is nanoscience. Oops, Jeanette, let me admit you. Okay. What is nanoscience? How are we making these materials? And then how do we actually see and characterize these materials? Okay. So, and again, the classroom implementation goals is, using your learning from today in the next couple days to sort of to create a tangible and implementable lesson plan that incorporates key nanoscience ideas. And that is really up to you on what you want to teach. I would pick something that you actually want to learn more about, you care about, or find important, so that you have a little bit of passion put behind it, right? And then either use your a lesson planning template, and it's again a sort of rough template that will be given to you. I think I'll show it to you in a little bit in the afternoon. But again, feel free to adapt your own. I know some schools are very particular, or there's some sort of charter school. There's certain parameters that you are needing to do. So again, feel free to do whatever you got to do. So what exactly is nano, right? So we already in the morning did this size and scale, how big is it activity. So we have a rough idea, but now I'm going to actually go into exactly how big, how small something is. All right. So the definition of nano is actually a Latin word meaning dwarf, nanus. And it's a prefix, right? So nanoscale, nanoscience, it just means something that is 10 to the negative ninth. And typically we use this as a description of length. So 1 nanometer is 10 to the negative ninth meters, which is also a billionth of a meter. So super tiny. And again, how small is nano? I won't go into this too much detail because I think we already talked about it decently, but again, we're looking at something that is, let me do the pointer, over here between 10 and 100 nanometers. So something so small you can't see with your eye. You can't actually even see that with a light microscope. It's so small. Your fingernails are growing 1 nanometer per second. And things that are down to around 10 nanometers, they're actually just a few atoms or a few hundred atoms in size. So you're actually working with something that is really, really small. So it's hard to manipulate, it's hard to see. So there are many, many challenges when it comes to working with it. But that's what makes it really exciting, because they're actually really unique and interesting properties that goes on. All right. So this is another example of how you could envision how small something at the nanoscale is. So if the world was the width of a meter stick, okay? So if the world width was a meter, a marble that you can hold in your hand would be basically a nanometer. So that's another way to sort of envision how small this is. And another thing that I thought was really cool, this artist a long time ago, or not that long time ago, but he created this fingerprint here. So on the left over here, this is actually the sort of really close up image of a fingerprint, like, on your finger. And then a tiny elephant, which is 0.157, so about 160 nanometers tall, and he put it on this fingerprint. And it kind of is interesting because it's all about context and relativity, right? Because if you had envisioned just the elephant on this plane, you'd say, oh, it's probably just like a black and white image of the Sahara Desert or wherever elephants are. African plain, probably. Yes. Okay. Whereas it actually is a fingerprint. So I thought that was sort of this interesting perspective on how to see and understand something. And I think as a scientist, it really would bother me personally, or has bothered me in the past, when people take electron images or images of something and they don't put a scale bar, okay? Scale bars are very important when it comes to the size and scale of an object. With that, why do we care about nano, right? It sounds cool, but what does it actually mean? What does it do for us? So what is so special about nano is here are just a few examples of their properties. A big thing is they have a high surface area to volume ratio, which is really advantageous when it comes to running chemical reactions or storage. And storage can be in a variety of ways, like hydrogen storage or electrical storage, a lot of different things. You can miniaturize things just like the little elephant. That's the whole reason why you have portable devices, is because of nanotechnology. Another cool thing is that it has a similar size to biological molecules and structures. So, you saw on the scale, things are really small. So you can do what I did in my research was do nano drug delivery. So the nanoparticles could go inside of cells because they were so small. And a couple of things that we'll just kind of touch upon are the wave properties of light are important, especially visible light. Visible light is 400 to 800 nanometers. Their wavelengths are, but the materials that we're working with are smaller than that. So what happens visually when something with visible light interacts with something much smaller than it? So we're going to talk about that as well. And there are a couple of things, or one more thing, which is quantum mechanical effects are important. So that means that no longer we have, regular Newtonian physics. Now we're talking about quantum physics. So it's a little bit different where things kind of get a little strange. Okay. And again, if anyone has questions or comments, feel free to put them in the chat or interrupt. I'm happy to field any questions. So again, example of surface area to volume ratio, right? If you cut a cube in half, what happens? The volume, does it change? Yes or no? Or sorry, the total volume, does it change? Of a one cube, if you cut it into pieces of 4, it won't change, correct? I see some, yeah, shaking heads. However, the surface area does change, right? So as you cut up this cube into smaller and smaller pieces, your surface area is actually increasing in an order of magnitude. And then if you actually cut them into 1 nanometer cubes, then you would, what is this? 6 orders of magnitude, much larger. And so that is actually really useful when it comes to, like I said, chemical reactions. You can have better reactivity. This is an example of this where a circle, a dot, actually has the least amount of surface area, and then but compared to volume, whereas over here you have the most surface area. So a cube is a decent amount of surface area. So a large surface area to volume ratio, which means you'll have more reactivity, which we're actually going to demonstrate with the one of the activities with the Alka-Seltzer and the water. All right. But the main point, the main takeaway is that generally in life, it helps you make reactions faster. So we're actually going to have a guest speaker talking about catalysis, which is actually how a lot of things are made on a large scale production. Like, for example, methanol or oil refinement, you use a lot of catalysts. And those catalysts are really expensive because they're made out of platinum and palladium. And so by shrinking them down, they make them more efficient and cheaper because we have to use less of the material. Okay. And then batteries, right? So we have a lot of batteries in our phones and our devices. So if you can have more surface area to store charge, like electrical charge, you can have a more efficient cell phone. You can have a more efficient battery pack that is less heavy and smaller. And for example, another thing is water treatments. I really feel like, I don't know if anyone seen the Life straw. They sell it on Amazon, but it's like $25 and you can just drink directly into any stream you want. And theoretically, it will remove a lot of viruses, particles, things that you don't want, obviously, inside of your body. So you can use a lot of nanotechnology when it comes to your own drinking water. There's lots of different types of filters. Surface area matters, with your Brita filter. If you had something that was really big, all the water would flow through, maybe too quickly to catch things. But if you had something that maybe was nanoscale, it would flow appropriately and protect you from filtering out certain objects in the water that you don't want. Okay, and then another thing is for modifying the surface of a nanoparticle. That's sort of more related to my research. You can functionalize the surface of nanoparticles and modify it where you can actually have targeted drug delivery. So that's really more geared towards like cancer treatments, right? An IV of chemotherapy drugs. Whereas if you loaded it up with nanoparticles and then coated the nanoparticles with a surface, you could actually have it targeted where the nanoparticles could get injected, but safely flow through the bloodstream and then go to wherever the tumor is and then release the drug there. So you're protecting yourself from the adverse effects of chemotherapy. Because the problem with chemotherapy is that the drug enters the entire body. So it will affect the good parts and the bad parts of, you know, what you're trying to treat. Any questions so far? Yes, no? How are we doing? Feeling good? I talk really fast too. I know that. So feel free to tell me to slow down. Oh, and a really big thing, which I think is really important, is your cell phone, right? Or everyone thinks is important, is your cell phone. What would we be without it? Probably I would be lost. I use Google Maps constantly. It's really embarrassing, actually. So anyway, the transistors are a big piece of how a computer functions, right? It's kind of the thing that does the ones and the zeros. And the ones and the zeros eventually, with a lot of complex math and things that are personally beyond me, they are basically the formation of how a computer will function, how it can think. You know, when you click that button, when you press a button here, that means something in the computer, right? Or you press a part of the screen, that means something in the computer. So a basis level is this transistor. And so back in the day, maybe you guys remember, maybe you were not born yet, but computers used to be the size of a room, and it would have the computing power of maybe a TI-83. I think we're on 89 now. I had a TI-83, which I guess ages me, but anyway, I had a TI-83 and it was, you know, really slow. You could maybe play like Snake on it or something, but anyway, phones used to be much sort of dumber. And part of the reason why is because the transistors that they had inside of those devices were very large. So they could only fit a certain amount onto the chip itself, the microchip, the brain of the computer. So now we're at sort of pushing limits around 10 nanometers, which is super tiny. So inside of your phone, you have billions of transistors. So for example, the newest iPhone is about 8.5 billion transistors, and each of those transistors is about 7 nanometers wide. And I think Jenny actually wrote up this slide, or helped me write up this slide, where she actually mentioned that there are 8 billion people on Earth, right? So in your pocket, in your cell phone, you have the equivalent of the same number of people as transistors. So I think that is sort of mind-boggling, right? And then this is, I think, a funny example of the evolution of the cell phone as it's changed and morphed, right? In the beginning, you could only make a phone call. Now you can make a phone call, send an email, send a video, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, another thing is that it's, again, same size or similar size or smaller than biology. So this is an example of a red blood cell with different types of nanoparticles. So you'll see that the tinier nanoparticles, they're actually going inside of the cells, whereas the bigger ones are just kind of sitting on top. They're just kind of being barricaded. So the size is also sort of this Goldilocks factor where it has to be the right size. It can't be too small and it can't be too big to actually go inside the cell and treat something. Okay, so this is a question for everyone. Do you think this is the same material or different types of material? So you can put it in the chat or feel free to unmute yourself. Whatever you guys want to do. Different? Okay, June thinks it's different. Amrit thinks it's different. Same. Okay, all right. Yanette, different, same? We got a mixed people. Okay. Samantha, did you want to say something?
No.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right, same material, different size. All right, Dustin, I think, knows what's going on because these are quantum dots. So these are actually basically all the same material, but they're different sizes. And this is sort of going back to this weird quantum thing that's going on. This is basically what is happening is that the nanomaterials have been excited by certain amount of energy, and they can only emit certain colors, certain wavelengths of light because of their size. So they're restricted by the size instead of the material. So that's where we were talking about sort of the quantum things look a little bit different when it comes to this. And that this is an example of that, where you have quantum dots that emit at different wavelengths of light due to their size and not their actual material properties. And it's a really cool process. And they're actually making quantum LED TVs or quantum dot TVs now, LEDs now. And I think they're only, $5,000. And then another thing, an example of sort of what is kind of gets a little funny at the nanoscale are the properties again are different. So if you had a block of gold, what color is it? It's gold, right? But then what happens if you chop it up? You cut it into smaller and smaller pieces. What happens to nanoscale gold? Any guesses? Do you think it still stays gold?
Same.
It stays the same?
Yeah.
Okay. Does it look the same?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I have bad news. It looks different. Okay. So it will look different. So this gold will then become red. So these are actually gold nanoparticle solutions, and these are electron images of the nanoparticles. So they get much, much smaller. I think it's really, really cool. And it's actually something that people have found in the Rose window in France. So the Rose window is a really famous window in Notre Dame. I think they saved it, but during the fire. But they were studying the colors of the window because just to take a step back, is color can be exhibited by different things, right? You have color in dyes or organic dyes or like dyes like, indigo, like jeans. Whereas you have other things that are metal salt dyes that usually last a little bit longer, like metal colored dyes. So they were inspecting this window, trying to understand why the window it was not degrading. The color was still pretty vibrant over hundreds of years, and a big part of that was because of the nanoparticles that were in the Rose window. So I thought that was really cool. And again, you'll notice, I don't know if you can see on the screen, but depending on the size, the colors kind of shift differently, right? Over on the left side, it's very red. And then as you shift to a larger size, it becomes more purple. And I think that's really interesting too. So again, it's the size confinement where the colors exhibit a different color as the nanoparticle sizes change. Again, going sort of back to the surface area, right? If you had blocks of ice or some ice that you were trying to melt down, do you think the large cube of ice would melt faster or the bag of ice would melt faster if they were the same size and shape? The bag, right? Usha, everybody's bag. Okay, bag is easy to understand, right? So if you had a beautiful ice sculpture, that would probably melt much slower than the bag of ice, right? Because the bag of ice, it has a lot of surface area, the air can get to it and melt it down. So again, things that are actually nanoscale can melt much quicker and react much faster when they're at the nanoscale, again, because of the surface area. All right, so what I think is also super cool is this example of ancient nanotechnology. So I want to make a point of saying that nanotechnology is not actually a new thing. The only thing that's different is that we actually have the technology to see it and manipulate it and really use it to our advantage. So way back when, what is this, 1600 years old, this thing is called the Lycurgus cup. You can look it up. But it's this Roman cup that somebody fashioned. It's made out of glass, but depending on the type of light and the angle it hits, it actually visually looks green or red. You can see it on the right side of the screen here. And that's because there are actually gold nanoparticles inside of the glass. And so depending on the angle, depending on the type of light, it will show red or it will show green, which I think is super cool. And then over here is this thing called the Sword of Damascus. They're, I think, really special swords for, I think, Mesopotamia area. Anyway, they have these really strong and really light swords that were really famous for, their excellent quality of work and craftsmanship and things like that. But they later studied and understood that there are actually carbon nanotubes in the actual metal. And I don't know if you guys know very much about carbon fiber, but carbon fiber actually has some carbon nanotubes, carbon materials where, again, it's light and it's very sturdy. And they found out that there are some carbon nanotubes sort of imbued into the metal, which I thought was really interesting to strengthen it, but keep it light. Okay. All right. And then another thing that's really interesting when it comes to nanoscience, nanomaterials, is that the structure of matter really, really matters. So can anyone guess what this material is? So I'll give you a hint. It's all the same thing. Yeah, Dustin, very good. So it is carbon. Carbon is all here. Can anyone guess what they are? All the different forms, maybe. Okay, somebody said graphite. Yep, so this is graphite, or this is actually one sheet, which would then be graphene. Okay, very good. And then here in the middle, this is actually a carbon nanotube. So that's basically graphene wrapped into a tube structure. And then over here, this is called a fullerene. A fullerene, also known as a buckyball, it kind of looks like a soccer ball, and it's another type of carbon. And then over here is a girl's best friend, right? Or I guess, I don't know. Well, anyway, it's not my best friend. My best friend is my dog, but this is a diamond structure. All right, so then, yeah, here are the different structures, okay? And the structure will actually, the actual atomic attachments will sort of matter how something looks like on the bulk scale. All right, so here an example of, again, some of the materials that you just saw, that was their atomic structure, but then this is actually their structure sort of on a more macro scale, but under an electron microscope. So what do you think is happening on the left side, right here on this screen? Or does anyone have any guesses of, carbon, fullerenes, diamonds, carbon nanotubes, or graphene, graphite? So it's one of those four materials, or two of the four materials that I mentioned. So Amrit thinks the right is diamond. Usha thinks it's graphite. Okay, very good. Very good. Okay, you guys are really good. You guys get it. What am I here for? Okay, so on the right side, yes, is actually diamond, and then on the left side is graphite. So I think it's really interesting to see that sometimes the form of the material will affect its functionality, right? So because a lot of the times people that are working at the nanoscale are building things with atoms, or can be building things with atoms. So you'll see that, for example, on the left side, the graphite, right, which is typically sheets of materials, right, in a pencil, or just a single sheet of graphite or graphene. You can see it's kind of like the side view of a bunch of sheets of graphene curled together, right? And then on the right side, the diamond, it really has that sort of diamond structure. So let me go back. Oops. So over here, right? The diamond, you'll see, has that structure at scale where you can actually see it. And the graphene, this is just one sheet head on, but if you sort of thought about a piece of paper getting crumpled up, you would envision it to look like right here, right? Okay, I skipped a slide by accident. So this is an example of allotropes of carbon. So it can take on many different forms. And so based on their atomic structure, it changes their properties on a larger scale, not just the nanoscale, but even larger. And so this is a point to make on when it comes to nanoscience or nanomaterials. We're actually using building blocks made up of atoms and molecules to dictate the different structures and properties of matter through a hierarchical structure, okay? So just another sort of thing where things look or feel a little bit different when it comes to the nanoscale. And this is on its bulk scale, right? This is graphene, graphite, and then diamond. But you wouldn't think that when you were looking at under the microscope. So I think that's kind of cool. Okay, so this is just a quick run through of how do we see and make things at the nanoscale, okay? So it's kind of like starting any sort of project. This is just an example of an art project, right? So you start with your materials that you're going to work with. It might be paints or brushes or pieces of paper. And then you also have your characterization tools that you're using. So that could be like your eyeball, a magnifying glass, a protractor, a ruler, things like that. And then your final application. What do you want your project to finally look like, ultimately look like? And we have actually those sets of tools the same way we have them for any sort of art project. Okay, so we have our what people call, some people call, a nano toolkit. So again, you cannot manipulate a lot of this matter with your hands, obviously, and so we have really specialized tools that are being used to manipulate that matter. Okay, so these are just a few examples. They all kind of look like big shiny boxes, which is not that exciting, but it is what it is, but they do have very useful properties. So, for example, we have tools to shine light and pattern a material. We have things that will analyze and visualize the materials that you're trying to look at. And I'm not going to go into too much detail because we're going to talk about it later. And then finally, a lot of different interesting applications like photovoltaics, which is basically a solar cell, different types of sensors or detectors where you could maybe catch cancer at an early stage where it's just circulating through the blood, or even things that are just for the pursuit of science to see if whether or not we can do it. So, for example, the small writing, this was actually a pretty cool endeavor where they manipulated atoms at Stanford to actually spell out S and U like right on top of each other and characterize it using a special technique. So lots of really cool things that are happening at Stanford. All right. So the biggest things when it comes to fabrication are two different ways to make something at the nanoscale. So we have top down, so that's taking a big piece of something and chopping away at it, similar to maybe making a marble structure. Or you have another way, which is bottom up. So that's almost like taking little Legos and then putting them together like a house or a piece, a box or a race car or whatever have you. So this would be more of the atoms and molecules being put together and assembled. Whereas on the left side, that's taking a big thing. That would be typically like when you're making a computer chip, you take a computer chip that's made out of a wafer, which I'll show you later. But it's a big shiny disc that you then cut into to make your nanoscale materials. And then another kind of interesting way is actually nano printing. I think a lot of middle school teachers or a lot of teachers are familiar with 3D printers, right? There's actually a really cool way to do 3D printing much smaller. So under like micron scale, so this is a tiny race car. You can see, again, scale lengths are important. So this is about a 200 micron race car that they printed. And I think this is supposed to be like the London Bridge, which is also quite small. Look at the tiny features. And like a little sumo wrestler, but you can actually do this kind of 3D printing at the nanoscale. The technology has evolved to that degree, which I thought is a really fun example as well. And then another thing, again, this is just a quick overview of looking at stuff, right? So you have all very likely looked at objects under an optical microscope, right? Where this is just kind of this little like diatom thing that you can that I think is found in the water. But you can see it and you can see there's some structure, but if you switched over to an electron microscope, you can see it in much more detail. And that's because light is only so limited, right? You have 400 to 800 nanometers of visible light, whereas the electron microscope can go much smaller. The wavelength of an electron is much, much smaller, so you can then study things or study objects that are then much smaller. And the SEM is particularly good because it actually gives you a better depth of field, whereas the optical microscope will only really give you a cross section. So I think this is really cool. The image even looks like it's kind of like popping out at you, right? Okay. And then, you know, again, why do we care about nano, right? Do we experience nano? Have we experienced nano? Do you guys know? Maybe? Very likely you have, okay? So a few examples of this are different types of technologies, like the transistor that I talked about inside of your phone, or the TVs that you watch every day. I watch my TV every day, unfortunately. And then you also have like different types of sensors. This is a really cool where the little red dot will tell you when your fruit is ripe. So it will actually measure, I believe, the amount of like ethylene gas that's permeating from these I think are pears, and will actually change the color. It's kind of like, when you're drinking a Coors Light, is the mountain blue? Can you drink the beer? Kind of thing, right? So it's similar to that, but not temperature. It's actually measuring whatever gas is being emitted. And then we have Michael Phelps here, where I think they eventually outlawed this with swimming, but they had this particular type of carbon fiber swimsuit that they used that just like shaved off crazy amount of time from swimming. So I think they outlawed it. And they also, Samsung came out with this really cool fridge where they lined the interior with silver nanoparticles, because silver nanoparticles is actually quite antibacterial. So it will prevent any bacteria from growing. So your food will smell less. And then you also have different types of coatings, like, Rain-X. If you, we're mostly in California, it doesn't rain that much, but if you were from the East Coast or lived on the East Coast, torrential downpours, right? Especially in the summer. So what if you had some sort of thin coating that could cover your windshield and really just let the water bead off? And so a lot of people have implemented that type of technology. Or what is it called? You can coat it with your clothes or your shoes to make it water repellent. A lot of coatings are being formulated that way. And then sunscreen, right? Way back when, you would have that like big white thing across your nose with the zinc oxide. And now most sunscreens just rub right in, right? And a big part of that is because the titanium dioxide and the zinc oxide that is used to protect your skin from the sun is actually ground down to actually really small particles, so that it just sits on your skin and rubs in really quickly, whereas previously they were much bigger, and so they would kind of leave this white cast on your skin. Okay, so I will try to wrap up pretty quickly, but one big thing, and this is something that I care quite a lot about, that's the whole reason why I went into nanoscience, was that nanoscience is something that is really recombinatory, right? It actually churns and pulls from all different disciplines, like, for example, computer science, chemistry, biology, physics, engineering, where you kind of take that and then filter it through a nanotechnology lens. And you have all these different new fields that are applicable to nanoscience. So, for example, you're combining here on nanoelectronics, maybe some computer science, some material science, and some engineering. And you have all these different types of new high-performing computers. You have flexible electronics, like this particular electronic is on a Band-Aid. So, you could have some sort of Band-Aid that instead of you like checking every day whether or not the scar has been healed, you have some little device that will tell you what's going on your skin, or even inside your body, with those sort of implantable devices that are slowly being rolled out. And then sort of in the middle, which is sort of a hybrid, are things like lab on a chip, where I don't know if a lot of you are in the Bay Area, but Theranos, remember Theranos, where they said, oh, this would be this like end all be all thing where you would only use one drop of blood to run like 20 different tests at once, right? Theoretically, that is definitely possible. The way they implemented it was just ridiculous, but it was something that is possible, where you have these labs on a chip where the chip is maybe the size of a penny, right? Where you have tons of different little amounts. And it kind of goes back to the surface area volume miniaturization thing, where if it was really, really tiny, you wouldn't need a whole vial of blood, right? You would only need a pinprick of blood to study all that stuff. So I think that's a really cool example. There's all these different types of ways to do cancer treatment or imaging, not necessarily be able to see it, especially inside of your brain. And then again, some more new types of nanomaterials, where you're going back with the structure of matter thing and manipulating the types of materials and the types of matter, where then you can maybe make like a new type of machine over here, a molecular machine, or a new type of material. So a lot of people have been working on cloaking devices or cloaking materials to prevent like an invisible cloak, basically from Harry Potter. So yeah, there's that. I won't go into too much detail because I think we are at time. So I'm going to skip the surface area. We're going to go straight to lunch because I don't want to keep you. But when we come back, we will do our service area demo. So please make sure to get the cups ready and your Alka-Seltzer tablet and some water ready, okay? All right, so I'll see you guys at 1:30.